Hello! At first I wanted to record a video about engagement rings in Ukraine, Russia and Belarus, but as I collected more and more information about engagement rings and about engagement in Ukraine, seems like this particular video will be a guide to engagement and to wedding for a foreign man with Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian, Moldovan or any other Slavic woman. If you are a foreign man and if you plan to marry Ukrainian, Russian or Belarusian or any Slavic lady, this video will be useful and very interesting for you. It took me more than 2 weeks to gather all the information, so please don't forget to like this video and share it in social media. I tried to record all my videos as informative as possible, but this particular video took much more time for me to record, much more energy and much more enthusiasm than usual. Well, enough of words, let's start. Many foreign men come to Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Moldova, other Slavic countries and ex-USSR countries to meet young beautiful ladies. Some men plan to marry and to form a family with those ladies. Some just come to play around, but I work mostly with men who plan to get married and form a family. And this information will be interesting for you. But before wedding itself takes place, many foreign men think that it is important to get engaged first, that you need to buy an engagement ring and propose to a girl or to a woman with that engagement ring. And only after that you get married and have a wedding party. Let's imagine you have finally met that one and only beautiful Ukrainian or Russian lady. You visited Ukraine or Russia and visited her several times already. You have even watched a video where I talk about how much a mail order bride from Ukraine would cost you, that you can view right here if you haven't already done so. And something clicks inside you and you sincerely believe that this is the right lady, that you should propose to her, that you should get married with this lady. You think it over and over again and something clicks inside you. Yes, this is the one. I think she loves me and I love her. I already love her. This is real love. I will marry her. I'll show that I am a serious man. My intentions are serious. She must know it. I'll make a proposition to her. And what do you need to make a proposition to her? Right words, maybe to get to know her parents, maybe some special gift. Yes, and once again, yes, you think. But of course, you need a very good engagement ring. Maybe an exclusive engagement ring. A ring with a gemstone, with a diamond.
Right? Wrong.
Let's discuss this subject with engagement rings and with proposition to a Ukrainian or Russian girl, and most importantly, how 90 or maybe even 95% of you, 95% of foreign men who propose to Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian or Slavic lady will in fact get scammed by buying and presenting that exclusive engagement ring. Before we get to this subject, please check if you are subscribed to my channel, and if you are not subscribed, please subscribe to it and hit that bell button so you don't miss out any upcoming videos. And of course, like this video if you really like it. Before we get to how you will be scammed, or most probably will be scammed, let me tell you that in ex-USSR, in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, there was no tradition of presenting an engagement ring to a girl when you were proposing to her. Yes, correct. And this is so important that I will repeat it once again. In ex-USSR, there was no tradition of presenting an engagement ring and actually get engaged when you wanted to marry a girl or a woman. Tradition with presenting engagement ring seems to be more popular among Catholics. Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Georgia were always Orthodox countries, mostly Orthodox countries. There were some Catholics, but it was less than maybe 1%. Anyway, those churches were controlled by government to the fullest extent possible, as in every country. But that's a subject for another video or maybe for another set of videos. Let's go a little bit back in time and let me tell you a little bit about how people got married in Soviet Union. When a couple decided to get married in Soviet Union, they had to go to a special registry office. And this is done even now like that, but I will talk about it a little bit later in this video. They had to write a written request, like a petition, to get married in that registry office. After they have written that petition and have registered it, their wedding day was scheduled. And usually it was after about 2 or 3 months after they have written that petition. Why, you would ask, 2 or 3 months? Why wait for so long? And because most probably about 85 to 90% of people who got married were young people. And young people may change their mind very quickly. And so that divorce rate would be as low as possible, a couple had to wait for 2 or 3 months. In some areas they had to wait maybe for 4 or for 5 months. And that is why in Soviet Union divorce rate was very, very low. Because if these young people just wanted to play around, they would get separated very, very quickly and will not get married. Of course, there were some possibilities to get married a little bit faster, like in 2 weeks, maybe even in 1 week. But that was done usually for a bribe. Yes, there was corruption in Soviet Union as well. Very important point that I should make, that before 1985 in Soviet Union there were no jewelry shops at all. Yes, correct. You could not buy any jewelry in the official way. No way. And in fact, maybe 98 or 99% of people just could not afford jewelry and didn't have any jewelry and didn't buy any jewelry. They simply didn't have any money for the jewelry. Even if somebody knew about engagement ring, it was almost not possible to buy one. But we all know that when couple gets married, they exchange wedding rings. So from where did people in Soviet Union buy those wedding rings? Good question. When couple filled in that request in the registry office to get married, they had to fill in the special request to buy wedding rings. In that way, they had to come about 5 days prior to wedding ceremony and get a special invitation to a jewelry shop, and they had to confirm that they are getting married and that nothing has changed in their plans over these 3 or 4 months. Since nothing has changed in their plans and they planned to get married, they got a special invitation to a jewelry shop. For example, in Odessa, where 1 million people lived, there were only 3 shops where they could buy wedding rings and maybe as a present earrings. In small cities before 1985 there were no jewelry shops at all, and those people who got married in small cities, they had to come to Odessa, to Kiev, to Dnipro, to Lviv, maybe to Moscow, and buy wedding rings by that invitation that they got from registry office in those shops. It is interesting that about 50% of people who got married didn't have any money even to buy those wedding rings. But nevertheless, they got that invitation and they went to that jewelry shop and they bought wedding rings and sometimes earrings as a present to the future wife. If they didn't have enough money and if they didn't plan to buy wedding rings, why did they get that invitation? How do you think? And from where did they get money for those wedding rings and maybe earrings? And some of you may have guessed correctly, they borrowed money even if they didn't have enough money to buy those wedding rings. They borrowed money from neighbors, from relatives, and they went to those shops, they bought those wedding rings, earrings, and they just sold them on a black market after that. And they could sell it on a black market usually at double price. There was a big black market in Soviet Union where you could buy many things, but you should know that about 50% of people who got married in Soviet Union just didn't have any wedding rings. Men or boys usually proposed to girls and women just with words, sometimes without even any present. And people in Soviet Union had a very low divorce rate. They lived a simple, not demanding, pretty happy life. Usually wedding ceremony was very simple. Couple with their best friends and maybe with 6 more friends, maybe with relatives, usually came to that registry office, got married, and then had like a wedding party in their home. But many lived with parents, so usually that wedding party was in parents' house, and about 10-15 people were invited, they celebrated, and that's it. Those who had some more money could go to a sanatorium, and it was like their honeymoon for 1 or 2 weeks. But about 30% or maybe even 40% of people could not afford that honeymoon. You would ask, what about those wedding parties in the restaurants? There were restaurants in Soviet Union. And yes, indeed, about 1% of people who were kids of somebody in KGB or in the police, maybe kids of some colonels, generals, they indeed had very nice parties in those restaurants and could afford pretty luxurious honeymoons in Crimea, in Sochi, maybe in the forests of Karelia, maybe in the Carpathian region, and so on and so on. But only about 1% or even less than 1% of people that were kids of high-ranked officials could afford those wedding parties in restaurants and those honeymoons in sanatoriums. I remember when my father was alive, he told me that in order to earn money for the wedding rings and for the wedding ceremony, he had to go to Siberia to work there for 2 months to a city called Tixi, and he built a runway there. He went there in spring and it was not so cold there, like about -5 to -15 degrees Celsius. After 2 months of hard work there, he got pneumonia and had to spend 3 weeks in hospital, in that Siberian hospital, after which he came to Odessa and married my mother. He was only 20 years old at that time, and it was the only possibility to earn money for the wedding for him. Quick, legal way. There were illegal ways, but I have been brought up in a family where traditions, values, and only legal way of life was taught. My parents, of course, with help of parents of my father and parents of my mother, could afford wedding rings, could rent a wedding dress for my mother, could afford a small wedding party for 12 people at home of my grandmother, and 2 weeks of honeymoon in the sanatorium next to Lviv. They could not afford sanatorium in Crimea where they wanted to go, and only afforded that sanatorium next to Lviv, about 30 to 40 kilometers from Lviv city. But in 1977, nobody knew about those engagement rings and nobody knew where to buy them, of course. When I was gathering information for this video, I asked several friends about their parents. My both best friends told me that their parents had no money to buy even those wedding rings and didn't have any wedding party at all. 2 other friends said that their parents bought wedding rings but had no wedding party and went also to Carpathian Mountains because it was very cheap to go there on a honeymoon. And of course, nobody had any engagement rings whatsoever. Want to know about my grandmother and grandfather? My grandmother is still alive, she is 91 years old, and I asked her about wedding rings and wedding dress, wedding party, and she didn't have any wedding rings, they just didn't have any money for that. They had no money for wedding dress either. They just went to registry office, they signed in that journal to be a wife and husband, and had a very small wedding party at home of my grandmother. And they invited 5 or 6 their best friends. They had no wedding rings once again, they had no wedding dress, they were very poor, but lived happily for 39 years when my grandfather died at the age of 65 years old. My grandmother, who is 91 years old, of course never got married again. She just could not imagine that in her life she would be with any other man. They lived very happily, even though they were very poor all their life. And my grandmother still has my grandfather's photo on a table next to her bed. She is in elderly house now, but she still has his photo on her table. Well, he was the only love of her life. My grandmother used to tell me that when my grandfather proposed to her, he only bought a box of chocolate candies to her. Chocolate candies that you can buy now for maybe $10. And I sincerely hope that many of you, well, that all of you find such wife, such love of your life, and live happily as my grandmother and grandfather lived. Just a box of chocolate candies that you can buy for $10 now. How much money did you spend on the restaurant with that scammer lady and the translator, huh? Want to know about my great-grandfather and great-grandmother? They got married in 1927. They had no wedding rings, no jewelry, no wedding dress, no wedding party, nothing. What do you think about engagement ring? Did they have any engagement ring? Of course no. They just didn't know that such engagement ring exists. My grandfather served in Soviet army. He was a major when he proposed to my grandmother. They lived in military settlements before World War II and for 20 years after World War II. My great-grandfather was a commander of partisan forces in Belarusian forests, and after World War II he became a general of Soviet army. But even though he was a general, he could not afford to buy a car for himself. He never had any car, even though he always wanted to have a car. My great-grandfather and great-grandmother lived from 1927 to 1988, when my great-grandfather died. They lived for 61 years, very, very, very happily. My grandmother didn't work after the World War II. She had problems with her eyes, and pension of my great-grandfather was enough for them. Just enough for them to live. Enough money for food for 3 of them, for my great-grandfather, great-grandmother, and my grandmother. And they could help my grandmother and even my mother from the pension of my great-grandfather. So all his pension was spent on food. And even though my great-grandfather always wanted a car, they just couldn't afford it. They didn't have any TV until 1984, so no TV set. Amazing, huh? How do you think? Did they know anything about engagement rings? Write me in comments. I really hope you found information in this video useful and interesting. Please let me know in comments, what did you think about engagement rings in ex-USSR countries? If you were to marry a Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian or just a Slavic girl, did you consider to buy an engagement ring for her? Let me know in comments, how much did you plan to invest in that engagement ring? After watching this particular video, has anything changed in your plans? Please let me know in comments. Those of you who need my individual help, assistance or advice, please feel free to email me at my email address, and I am always glad to help those people who really need help. In second part of this video, series of which I would call a guide to engagement and wedding a Ukrainian, Russian, Belarusian or just any Slavic girl by a foreign man, I will show you in great details how engagement or wedding procedure in church takes place. You would see what exactly to expect if your future wife would want to have this special sacred engagement or wedding ceremony in church in Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Georgia, or in some other Slavic country. I wish you all success, good luck, joy, tranquility, and of course, stay healthy and wealthy.